It was a Tuesday morning when the world, as I knew it, shattered. The sound of Harold's body collapsing on the bathroom floor still echoes in my mind. That awful thud woke me from a deep sleep, and I rushed to find my husband of 42 years sprawled on the floor, his face gray and his breathing shallow. Harold, who had always been so strong and stubborn, was helpless. I knelt beside him, my hands trembling as I checked for a pulse. His heartbeat was weak and erratic. Panic shot through me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator was professional, but Harold's breathing was getting worse. The ambulance was on its way, but in our small town, that could take 20 minutes or more. That's when I made the call that would change everything. I called our son, Everett, who lived only 15 minutes away. Surely, he would drop everything to help his father. On the third ring, my daughter-in-law, Oilia, answered. "What is it now, Doreen?" she said, her voice clipped and irritated. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained what happened. "Oh, thank God. I need you and Everett to come right away. Harold collapsed, and he's really bad. The ambulance is coming, but I'm scared." She cut me off with an exaggerated sigh. "Seriously? We're in Tuscany, Doreen. We're on vacation." I was stunned. "What do you mean you're in Tuscany? When did you?" "We left Sunday night. I posted about it on Facebook. Maybe if you actually paid attention to our lives, instead of always making everything about you and Harold, you'd know these things." Her words hit me like a slap. I looked down at Harold, whose lips were turning blue. "Oilia, please," I begged. "He's really sick. He might be having a heart attack. I need Everett to—" "You're 66 years old," she said, her voice patronizing. "You're not a child. Learn to handle things yourself. Call 911, drive him to the hospital, whatever. But don't expect us to drop everything and fly home, because Harold has another one of his episodes." "This isn't an episode, Oilia. He's unconscious. He's barely breathing. Please just put Everett on the phone. Everett is getting a massage. We paid good money for the spa package, and I'm not ruining it because you can't handle a medical situation like any other adult would. Figure out." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, unable to believe she had just hung up on me while my husband was dying. The silence on the other end confirmed what my heart already knew. They weren't coming. The ambulance arrived 18 minutes later. By then, Harold had stopped responding. I rode in the back, holding his cold hand while the paramedics worked on him. All I could think about was Oilia's voice saying, "Learn to handle things yourself." At the hospital, they rushed Harold into the cardiac unit. I sat in a plastic chair in the waiting room, still in my nightgown. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of disinfectant made me nauseous. I called Everett again, hoping Oilia had misunderstood the severity. This time, Everett answered. "Mom, Oilia told me you called. Look, I know you're worried, but Dad's been to the emergency room 4 times this year. Remember that chest pain in March that turned out to be acid reflux?" His voice was calm, reasonable, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. In the background, I could hear laughter and music. "Everett, this is different. He collapsed. He's in intensive care. They're talking about emergency surgery. Mom, you tend to catastrophize. Remember when you thought I was dying of pneumonia when I just had a cold? The doctors will take good care of him. We'll be home in 10 days, and I'm sure he'll be fine by then." "What if he's not fine?" I whispered. "Then we'll deal with it when we get back. But honestly, Mom, Dad's too stubborn to die. He'll probably outlive us all, just to spite everyone." He laughed at his own joke. "I have to go, Mom. We have dinner reservations at this amazing place overlooking the Mediterranean. Give Dad my love when he wakes up." The line went dead again. I sat there for hours, watching nurses and doctors hurry past, listening to the beeping of machines and the murmur of medical conversations. I watched other families support each other and felt more alone than I ever had in my life. At 2:47 a.m., Dr. Martinez found me still in that same plastic chair. His expression told me everything before he said a word. Harold was gone. The massive heart attack had been too severe, the damage too extensive. if he'd received treatment sooner. But those were all what-ifs now. I signed papers I couldn't focus on, but all I could hear was Oilia's voice saying, "Figure out," and my son's laughter echoing in my ears. Harold died alone, except for me, while our son enjoyed Mediterranean cuisine, and our daughter-in-law got her spa treatments. They'd chosen a vacation over a family emergency, and now it was too late for them to choose anything else. As I sat in the hospital parking lot at dawn, watching the sunrise, I realized something else had died in me, too. The part that believed family always comes through for each other. The part that made excuses for my son's priorities and his wife's coldness. I drove home to an empty house and began planning a funeral, knowing that when Everett and Oilia finally returned from their perfect vacation, they'd find a very different version of me waiting. They came back 2 days early, but not because of a change of heart. I was sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by sympathy cards, when I heard Oilia's voice. She was on her phone complaining about having to cut the trip short because of Harold's dramatic timing. When I opened the door, Everett looked uncomfortable in a wrinkled suit. Oilia wore designer sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She was still on her phone. I know, right? Like who has a heart attack on a Tuesday? Couldn't he have waited until we got back? She noticed me watching and rolled her eyes. I have to go. The grieving widow is giving me looks. Everett cleared his throat. Mom, we're so sorry we weren't here. If we'd known it was as serious. You did know, I said, my voice flat and emotionless. I told you exactly how serious it was. Oilia finally looked at me directly, lowering her sunglasses. Doreen, honey, you have to understand. We had no way of knowing this time was different. Harold had so many false alarms. False alarms. She was calling my husband's previous health scares false alarms, as if his suffering hadn't been real because he had survived. You know we would have come if we'd realized, Everett said, stepping forward as if to hug me. We feel terrible about this. I looked at my son's face, searching for genuine remorse, but all I saw was performance of grief. The funeral is tomorrow at 2, I said simply. St. Matthew's. Tomorrow. Oilia's voice pitched higher. That's so soon. We haven't even had time to process this. And we're exhausted from a flight. Can't we push it back a few days? Harold's been dead for 5 days, I replied. He can't wait any longer for his family to be ready. The funeral was exactly what Harold would have wanted. Simple, dignified, and filled with the neighbors and friends who had actually been part of our lives. Everett and Oilia sat beside me, but they felt like strangers. During the service, Oilia checked her phone 3 times. Everett gave a generic speech that could have applied to anyone. It was like listening to someone read from a template. After the service, I was talking to Agnes Morrison, Harold's former secretary, when I overheard Oilia talking to her sister on her phone, just behind a pillar. Well, at least now we can finally do something with that beach house. It's been sitting there wasted while they barely used it. Did you see the property values in that area? We could renovate it into something really spectacular. My blood turned to ice. Agnes was still talking, but I couldn't hear her anymore. All I could focus on was Oilia's voice, casual and businesslike, discussing my husband's property as if she were planning a shopping trip. The old house will probably need to be sold, too. I mean, what does Doreen need with all that space? She should really be thinking about downsizing anyway. A nice little condo somewhere would be much more appropriate for a woman her age. Agnes noticed my expression. Doreen, dear, are you all right? I excused myself and walked toward the ladies' room, but Oilia's voice followed me. The life insurance should help, too. Harold was old-fashioned about these things, so I'm sure he left Doreen well provided for, which means she won't need to hold on to assets she can't maintain. It's really the practical thing to do. I locked myself in the stall, my hand shaking. She was already dividing up Harold's life, our home, our memories, our 42 years together. She was doing it at his funeral, while his body was still warm in the casket. When I came out, the receiving line was ending. That's when Oilia approached me. She had put her sunglasses back on and carried herself with the confidence of someone who thought she was about to have a very reasonable conversation. Doreen, I hope you don't mind, but Everett and I were talking, and we think it might be good for you to have some help going through Harold's things. You know, making decisions about what to keep and what to move along. Move along? I asked. Well, you know how men accumulate things. Tools, books, clothes that don't fit anymore. The house has so much stuff that's probably just overwhelming for you to deal with alone. We could help you sort through everything. Maybe start with a beach house, since that's the most complicated. It needs so much work anyway. And honestly, when would you ever use it now? The beach house. The little cottage Harold and I had bought 30 years ago, where we'd spent every anniversary and where Everett had learned to swim. She was talking about it like it was already hers. That's very thoughtful of you, Oilia. I said, my voice so calm and surprised even me. She smiled, thinking she'd won something. I'm glad you're being practical about this. I know Harold would want you to make smart decisions. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a compassionate whisper, but I could hear the calculation underneath. Between you and me, Doreen, it's probably better this way. You and Harold were getting to an age where maintaining multiple properties was becoming a burden. Now you can focus on what really matters. Taking care of yourself. Taking care of myself. As if Harold had been a burden instead of my partner. As if our life together was something I needed to be freed from. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking confidently across the church floor. She moved like someone who had just solved a problem, made a smart business decision. At my husband's funeral, while I was saying goodbye to the love of my life, she was already moving into our future. But as I stood there watching her go, I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, raw and overwhelming, but underneath it, something else was growing. Something that felt like a foundation Harold had taught me to build. Solid, unshakable, and absolutely certain of what needed to be done. I walked to the fellowship hall, where people were sharing stories and comfort food. Oilia was at a corner table showing photos from Tuscany to anyone who would listen. Everett sat beside her, nodding along as if this were perfectly normal behavior at his father's funeral. But I smiled and accepted condolences and let everyone think I was just a grieving widow who needed their protection and support. Because sometimes the most dangerous woman in the room is the one no one sees coming. 3 days after we buried Harold, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a man in a navy suit with a leather briefcase. I almost didn't answer. The past week had been a parade of well-meaning neighbors and insurance representatives. But something about the man's posture made me open the door. Mrs. Holloway, I'm James Crawford from Crawford & Associates. I was your husband's attorney. I blinked at him. Harold's attorney? But we used Peterson and Smith for our wills. Have for 20 years. Mr. Crawford nodded, his expression gentle but serious. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Peterson handled your family's general legal needs. But 6 months ago, Mr. Holloway retained me to draft a new will and a few other documents. When Mr. Crawford, Harold's attorney, told me my husband had hired him months ago for private matters, my stomach dropped. In 42 years of marriage, we had made every major decision together, especially when it came to our wills. I told him there must be a mistake. That Harold would have told me. Mr. Crawford's face was gentle but serious. Mrs. Holloway, may I come in? There are some things about your husband's final wishes that you need to know. I let him in and led him to the living room, where he sat across from me, his briefcase on the coffee table Harold had built with his own hands. Your husband came to me in distress last October, he said. He discovered some things about your family that had changed his perspective on how his estate should be handled. October. I tried to think back. It was around Everett's birthday. We'd had a family dinner, and I remembered Oilia being particularly prickly. Mr. Crawford opened his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. He was particularly concerned about conversations he'd overheard between your son and daughter-in-law. What kind of conversations? I asked, my hands clenching in my lap. He pulled out a typed transcript. This conversation took place on October 15th during your son's birthday dinner. Your husband was upstairs helping his mother get ready for bed. Your son and daughter-in-law were in your kitchen. I took the transcript with trembling hands. The header read, audio recording, Everett and Oilia Holloway. October 15th, 10:47 p.m. The words blurred as I read. Oilia, God, these family dinners are torture. How much longer do you think we have to keep doing this? Everett, what do you mean, Oilia? Oilia, I mean, your parents aren't getting any younger. Your dad's had, 3 trips to the ER this year? And your grandmother is completely gone mentally. It's just a matter of time. Everett, Oilia, that's pretty dark, even for you. Oilia, I'm being practical. They're sitting on prime real estate and a decent life insurance policy. And for what? So your mother can hoard knickknacks and your father can putter around fixing things that don't need fixing? It's a waste. Everett, keep your voice down. Oilia, they can't hear us. Besides, I'm not saying anything terrible. I'm just pointing out that when this generation finally moves on, we'll be in a position to really build something. The beach house alone is worth, $400,000 now? And this place has to be worth $600,000. Easy. I stopped reading, a wave of nausea washing over me. Mr. Crawford gestured for me to continue. Everett, I don't really want to think about this right now. Oilia, well, you should think about it, because your mother is going to live forever out of pure stubbornness. And meanwhile, we're stuck in that tiny condo making nice at family dinners while our real life is on hold. Everett, what are you suggesting, Oilia? Oilia, I'm suggesting that maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing if your father's next health scare was actually serious. And maybe your mother would be happier in one of those nice senior communities where she could socialize with people her own age instead of rattling around this big empty house. Everett, Jesus, Oilia. Oilia, I'm talking about their quality of life. Wouldn't they be happier somewhere they could get proper care when they need it? Everett, and we'd be happier with their money. Oilia, well, yes, obviously. That's how inheritance works, Everett. The old generation dies and leaves their assets to the young generation, who can actually use them productively. The transcript went on for 3 more pages. They discussed renovating the beach house and the value of Harold's life insurance, treating us like obstacles to their financial future. I set the papers down, my hands shaking. Harold had heard all of this. Yes, ma'am, Mr. Crawford said softly. He brought the recording to me the next week. Devastated would be an understatement. I could picture Harold upstairs, listening to his own son and daughter-in-law, discussing his death like a business opportunity. The betrayal must have cut him deeper than any physical pain. He wanted to change his will immediately, Mr. Crawford continued, but I advised him to wait to think it through. We scheduled another appointment for December. Mr. Crawford pulled out another document. He created an entirely new will, separate from the one Mr. Peterson had drafted. His portion of your joint assets, his life insurance, and his individual properties have been placed in a trust, the Harold Holloway Memorial Trust, for cardiac care. It will fund emergency cardiac treatment for uninsured patients at Regional Medical Center. The trust is managed by the hospital's board of directors, with you as the sole beneficiary during your lifetime. I was stunned. What does that mean? It means you have full use of the trust's assets during your lifetime. You can live in any of the properties, use the income from investments, access the funds for your personal needs. But when you pass away, everything goes to the hospital to continue funding cardiac care. So Everett and Oilia get nothing? Not the beach house, not the life insurance money, not any portion of your husband's estate. The room spun. Harold had heard his son planning his death and had responded by cutting him out entirely. But he had protected me, ensured I would never be at the mercy of Everett and Oilia's greed. There's more, Mr. Crawford said gently. Your husband recorded several other conversations over following months. Would you like to hear them? I nodded. He pulled out a small digital recorder. Oilia's voice filled my living room, clear and cold. I give Harold 6 months, maybe less. These old men never last long after their mothers die, and honestly, it would solve so many problems. Doreen's manageable. She'll do whatever Everett tells her to do. But Harold's stubborn. He'd probably try to hold on to this house until he's 90. Everett's voice replied, Mom's pretty attached to him. She'll grieve for a while, then she'll realize she's better off. Think about it. No more worrying about his health. No more adjusting her schedule around his doctor appointments. Freedom. I reached over and turned off the recorder. I couldn't listen to any more. Mrs. Holloway, Mr. Crawford said softly, your husband left specific instructions about when this information should be revealed. He wanted to wait until after the family had had time to show their true intentions regarding the estate. He suspected they would pressure you about the properties. As if summoned by his words, my phone rang. Everett's name appeared on the screen. I answered. Hi, Mom. Oilia and I were wondering if you'd had a chance to think about what we discussed at the funeral, about getting some help organizing Dad's things. His voice sounded so normal, so caring. If I hadn't just read those transcripts, I might have believed him. Actually, Everett, I think we should all sit down together soon. There are some things about your father's final wishes that we need to discuss. Oh, good. How about tomorrow? We could start with the beach house papers, just to get the ball rolling on some of the more complicated stuff. I closed my eyes, hearing Oilia's voice in my head. The beach house alone is worth what, for $100,000 now? Tomorrow sounds perfect, I said. Let's meet here at 2 o'clock. Great, Mom. We'll take care of everything. Dad would want you to have help with all this legal stuff. After I hung up, Mr. Crawford packed his papers. Are you ready for tomorrow, Mrs. Holloway? I thought about Harold protecting his mother, and in doing so, accidentally uncovering the truth about her son. I thought about Oilia calculating the value of our life at Harold's funeral. Mr. Crawford, I said, I want copies of everything. Every recording, every transcript, every document Harold signed. Of course, he said. And Mrs. Holloway, your husband asked me to tell you something if this day ever came. He said to remember that the family you build is more important than the family you're born into. And sometimes protecting the people you love means protecting them from the people they love. After he left, I sat in Harold's chair and looked around our living room. Tomorrow, Everett and Oilia would walk in here expecting to begin dividing up our life together. They had no idea that Harold had heard every word of their plans. They had no idea that their greed had cost them everything they had hoped to gain. And they had no idea that the quiet, grieving widow they thought they could manipulate had just learned exactly who they really were. The next day, they arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. Oilia's voice carried through the door before they even knocked. Remember, we need to be gentle but firm. She's probably overwhelmed by all the paperwork and decisions. We're doing her a favor by taking charge. I opened the door to find them both dressed like they were attending a business meeting. Everett wore a suit I'd never seen before, and Oilia carried a leather portfolio. Mom, you look tired, Everett said, kissing my cheek, as well as can be expected. I led them to the living room where Mr. Crawford and I had sat the day before. Mr. Crawford was already there. Oilia's smile faltered slightly when she saw the lawyer, but she recovered quickly. Wonderful, she said. It's always good to have professional guidance during these transitions. She settled into Harold's chair, spreading her own papers on the side table with proprietary confidence. Everett sat on the couch, but I noticed he kept glancing at Mr. Crawford with poorly concealed nervousness. Now then, Oilia began addressing me. I know this is hard to think about, but we need to be practical. Harold left you with significant assets, but also significant responsibilities. This house, the beach cottage, the maintenance, the property taxes, it's a lot for one person to manage. I sat across from them, noting how Oilia had positioned herself in Harold's chair while relegating me to the couch like a guest in my own home. I see you've done some research. Of course. We want to make sure you have all the information you need to make good decisions. She picked up on the papers. For instance, did you know this house is now valued at $640,000? That's a significant asset that's just sitting here. Everett leaned forward. And the property taxes alone are over $8,000 a year. That's a lot of money going out every month for a house that's really too big for one person. Exactly, Oilia said, warming to her theme. And think about the utilities, the upkeep, the yard work Harold used to do. You'll have to hire people for all of that now. It adds up quickly. She pulled out a brochure. "I've been looking at some lovely senior communities in the area. Thornfield Estates is particularly nice. They have activities, medical support on site, and you'd have your own apartment, but with none of the worries of maintaining a whole house." The irony of Oilia expressing concern about me having a medical emergency with no family support wasn't lost on me. I kept my expression neutral. "Now, as for the beach house," she said, pulling out more papers, "that property really does need immediate attention. The roof is at least 15 years old. The plumbing is original to the house, and the electrical system isn't up to current codes. We're talking about major renovations just to keep it habitable." Everett nodded along. Dad was always patching things instead of really fixing them. The foundation has some settling issues, too. I remembered Harold spending weekends at the beach house, carefully maintaining every detail. He'd redone the electrical himself just 3 years ago. "Have you had contractors look at it?" I asked. Oilia and Everett exchanged a quick glance. "Well, not exactly," she admitted. "But these old beach properties all have the same problems. Salt air, moisture, settling foundations. It's just the reality of coastal real estate." She spread out what looked like renovation plans. "But look at the potential. With the right updates, this could be a showpiece. Open concept living, modern kitchen, spa-style bathrooms. The lot is large enough to add a pool and maybe even a guest cottage." I looked at the plans. They weren't rough sketches. They were detailed architectural drawings with measurements and specifications. "These are very detailed plans," I said. "When did you have them drawn up?" Oilia's cheeks flushed slightly. "Oh, these are just some ideas we've been playing around with. You know how I love design projects." But the dates on the drawings told a different story. November 15th, 2 weeks after Harold's mother had died, months before Harold's heart attack. Oilia had been planning renovations to our beach house while Harold was still alive. These kinds of renovations are expensive, probably $200,000 or more, Everett continued. But the property value after improvements would easily hit $700,000. "Of course," Oilia added quickly. "That's only if you want to sell it eventually. But honestly, Doreen, when would you use a beach house now? It seems like a lot of expense and worry for something that would just sit empty most of the time. It sounds like you've put a lot of thought into this." "We just want what's best for you, Mom," Everett said. "Dad always worried about leaving you with too much to handle." This was a lie. "Actually," Oilia said, leaning forward with sudden enthusiasm, "I have an idea that might solve everything." She pulled out a different set of papers. "What if Everett and I took over the beach house renovation project? We could handle all the contractors, manage the timeline, deal with all the headaches. You could focus on settling into your new place without the stress of a construction project." I looked at the papers she'd handed me. They were contracts that would give Everett and Oilia full authority to make decisions about the beach house renovation. "This seems very generous of you," I said, "but also like a lot of work." "Well," Oilia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we'd be investing our own time and energy. So naturally, when the property is eventually sold, we'd need to recoup our investment plus a reasonable return." There it was, the real plan. They wanted me to sign over control of the beach house so they could renovate it with my money, then claim a significant portion of the profits when it's sold. What percentage would be reasonable? I asked. Everett shifted uncomfortably. "We haven't really worked out all the details yet. I was thinking 60/40ths, Oilia said smoothly, since we'd be doing all the work and taking all the risk. 60%. They wanted 60% of a property, Harold, and I had owned for 30 years. "And what about this house?" I asked. "Well, obviously you'd need to sell it to fund your move to Thornfield Estates," Oilia said. "But there should be plenty left over. You might even come out ahead financially. No more property taxes, utilities, or maintenance costs." They were talking about dismantling my entire life, as if it were a simple accounting problem. "This is a lot to think about," I said. "Of course it is," Everett said. "But Mom, the sooner we get started, the sooner you can stop worrying about all these responsibilities." "I do have one question," I said, "about the beach house renovations. How exactly would you fund a $200,000 project?" Another quick glance between them. Well, Everett said slowly, we were thinking you could take out a home equity loan against this house. The interest rates are good right now. I felt something cold settle in my chest. They wanted me to mortgage my home to pay for renovations to a property that they would then control and profit from. They were asking me to risk the roof over my head so they could build their dream vacation house. Or, Oilia said, if you decided to sell this place right away, you could use part of those proceeds. Either way, the numbers work out beautifully. She pulled out a calculator and started running figures. It was a convincing presentation. They'd thought of everything. You've really thought this through, I said. We have, Oilia said proudly. And we'll handle everything, Everett added. All the paperwork, all the decisions. You won't have to worry about any of it. You know what? I said, standing up suddenly. I think I should probably discuss all of this with Harold's lawyer first, just to make sure I understand all the legal implications. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Oilia's smile became fixed and artificial. Oh, I don't think that's necessary, she said quickly. Actually, I meant Harold's other lawyer, Mr. Crawford. Did you know Harold had been working with another attorney lately? The look that passed between Everett and Oilia told me they most definitely had not known about Mr. Crawford. Other lawyer? Everett's voice was carefully controlled. What for? Apparently, Harold had some concerns about his estate planning. Mr. Crawford is coming by tomorrow to discuss Harold's final wishes with all of us. I watched Oilia's face carefully as I said this. For a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw panic flash across her features. She forced a laugh. Well, I'm sure it's nothing that changes the basics. But her hands were shaking as she packed up her papers, and Everett had gone very quiet. They left with promises to call soon. After they drove away, I stood at my front window. They had no idea that tomorrow's meeting with Mr. Crawford wouldn't be about Harold's final wishes. It would be about their own recorded confessions of greed and manipulation. And as I thought about the architectural plans dated from when Harold was still alive, I realized something that made my blood run cold. They hadn't just been waiting for Harold to die. They'd been actively planning for it, preparing to profit from our loss before it even happened. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt like I had a purpose beyond just surviving each day. At exactly 10 o'clock, Mr. Crawford arrived. I had asked him to come an hour before Everett and Oilia were expected. Wanted to make sure we had everything prepared. Are you ready for this, Mrs. Holloway? He asked as we settled in the living room. I've been ready since I heard those recordings. I said, Harold protected me even after death. The least I can do is honor that. Mr. Crawford began arranging documents on the coffee table. I want you to understand exactly how this will unfold. First, I'll review the existing will that your family believes is still valid. Then, I'll present Harold's amended will and the trust documents. Finally, we'll play selected portions of the recordings. How do you think they'll react? Based on my experience? Denial first, then anger, then desperate attempt at negotiation. Mrs. Holloway, I need you to be prepared for them to say hurtful things. When people realize they've lost something they counted on, they often lash out at whoever they perceive as responsible. At 11 o'clock sharp, I heard car doors slam in my driveway. I opened the door before they could knock. Everett, Oilia, please come in. Mr. Crawford is here to discuss your father's estate. Oilia's smile faltered slightly when she saw the lawyer, but she recovered quickly. Wonderful. It's always good to have professional guidance during these transitions. She settled into Harold's chair again, spreading her own papers on the side table with proprietary confidence. Everett sat on the couch, but I noticed he kept glancing at Mr. Crawford with poorly concealed nervousness. Now then, Oilia began addressing me. Mr. Crawford began, his voice professionally neutral. I understand you've been discussing Mrs. Holloway's future housing arrangements and the disposition of certain properties. That's right, Oilia said smoothly. We want to make sure Doreen has the support she needs to make good decisions during this difficult time. How thoughtful, Mr. Crawford replied. And I assume you're both familiar with the existing will that was drafted by Peterson and Smith. Generally speaking, Everett said. Dad always said he wanted to keep things simple. Equal distribution between Mom and me, with Mom getting the house and Dad's life insurance. Yes, that's what the original was specified. However, there have been some changes that affect those arrangements. I watched Oilia's face carefully. She was trying to stay composed, but I could see tension building around her eyes. What kind of changes? She asked. 6 months ago, your father-in-law came to me with concerns about his estate planning. He discovered some information that made him reconsider how his assets should be distributed. What information? Everett's voice was sharper now. Mr. Crawford reached into his briefcase and pulled out the digital recorder. Mr. Holloway had installed a baby monitor system to care for his mother during her final illness. The system inadvertently recorded several conversations that took place in this house. The color drained from Oilia's face. Everett shifted forward on the couch, his hands clenched into fists. I don't understand, Oilia said, her voice losing its confident tone. What does that have to do with Harold's will? Everything, Mr. Crawford said simply. He pressed play on the recorder. Oilia's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. God, these family dinners are torture. How much longer do you think we have to keep doing this? I watched my son's face as he heard his own voice responding. He realized that every cruel word, every calculated comment about Harold's death, every discussion of our property values had been preserved. When the recording reached the part where Oilia discussed Harold's next health scare being actually serious, she lunged for the recorder. Turn that off. That's illegal. You can't record people without their consent. Mr. Crawford calmly moved the device out of her reach. Actually, in this state, recording conversations that take place in your own home is perfectly legal. And since Mr. Holloway installed the system for legitimate safety reasons, these recordings are admissible evidence of your intentions regarding his estate. Those conversations were taken out of context. Everett said desperately, "We were just talking hypothetically about the future." Were you? Mr. Crawford pulled out the architectural plans Oilia had shown me the day before. Because these renovation plans for the beach house are dated November 15th, when your father was still alive and actively using the property. It appears you were making very concrete plans for assets you didn't yet own. Oilia's hand shook as she stared at the plans. Those were just ideas, design concepts. There's nothing wrong with thinking about possibilities. Perhaps not. But combined with the recorded conversations expressing hope for your father-in-law's death and detailed financial calculations based on his life insurance policy, these plans paint a rather clear picture of your motivations. Mr. Crawford opened another folder, which brings us to your father's response to these discoveries. He placed a thick legal document on the coffee table. The Harold Holloway Memorial Trust for Cardiac Care, established December 20th of last year. I watched Everett scan the first page, his face growing paler with each line he read. What is this? Your father's amended will, his portion of all joint assets, his life insurance policy, and his individual properties, including the beach house, have been placed in an irrevocable trust. A trust for what? Oilia's voice was barely a whisper. Cardiac emergency care for uninsured patients. Your father was quite specific about his reasoning. He felt that since his own family couldn't be relied upon during his medical emergency, he wanted to ensure other families wouldn't face the same abandonment. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway as my son and daughter-in-law processed the complete collapse of their financial expectations. This can't be legal, Oilia finally said. You can't just cut out your own family. There are laws about that. Actually, there aren't. In this state, you have no legal right to inherit from your spouse's parents. Mr. Holloway was free to dispose of his assets as he saw fit. But the beach house, Everett said weakly, we've been taking care of it, maintaining it. Have you? Mr. Crawford pulled out maintenance records. According to these receipts, your father personally handled all upkeep and repairs. There's no record of any financial contribution from either of you. We contributed time. Oilia protested. We helped with cleaning, with organization. I almost laughed. Mrs. Holloway, Mr. Crawford continued, turning to me. As the surviving spouse, you maintain full use of all trust assets during your lifetime. You can live in either property, access investment income, and make decisions about maintenance and improvements. But upon your death, everything transfers to the hospital foundation. What does that mean for us? Everett asked. It means, I said quietly, that you get exactly what you planned for me to have after I moved to that senior community. Nothing. Oilia shot to her feet. This is your doing. You turned Harold against his own son. Actually, Mr. Crawford interrupted, Mrs. Holloway had no knowledge of these changes until after her husband's death. The recordings make it clear that Mr. Holloway acted solely based on what he heard you say. He played another segment. Oilia's voice discussing how manageable I would be after Harold's death, how I'd do whatever Everett told me to do. Harold realized, I said, standing to face them, that you weren't waiting to inherit from us. You were waiting for us to die. That's not true, Everett protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? You went to Tuscany while your father was dying. Oilia told me to figure out myself, while Harold fought for his life alone in a hospital room. We didn't know how serious it was, Oilia said, but even she seemed to realize how hollow that sounded now. You did want to know because Harold's death was inconvenient timing for your vacation, not a family tragedy. Mr. Crawford packed his papers. I think that covers everything. Mrs. Holloway, you have my contact information. Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, I'd recommend you consult with your own attorney if you have questions about the trust documents. Though, I should mention that Mr. Harold included very specific language preventing any challenges to his decisions. After he left, the three of us sat in horrible silence. Oilia stared at the trust documents as if she could will them to say something different. Everett kept opening and closing his mouth as if searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally, Oilia spoke. You could contest this. We're family. We could work together to challenge the trust. I looked at her with something approaching pity. Even now, she thought she could manipulate me. Oilia, I was married to Harold for 42 years. I loved him more than my own life. Why would I contest what was designed to honor his memory and help people who face the same medical emergencies he did? Because Everett is your son, she exploded. Blood is supposed to mean something. It does mean something. It means I raised Everett to be better than this. It means Harold loved him enough to give him chance after chance to prove he cared about more than money. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden Harold had planted for me, now dormant but ready to bloom again in spring. You want to know what blood means to me? It means remembering the boy who used to help his father build birdhouses. It means loving someone enough to be heartbroken when they choose greed over family. When I turned around, they were both crying, but I felt nothing except a profound sense of peace. Harold had protected me from them, and now I finally understood why. 6 months after that terrible confrontation, I stood in the cardiac unit at Regional Medical Center, watching Dr. Martinez explain treatment options to a young woman whose husband had just suffered a massive heart attack. She had 2 small children clinging to her legs and terror in her eyes. The surgery is expensive, Dr. Martinez was saying gently, but the Harold Holloway Memorial Trust can cover the costs if you qualify. What do I need to do? She asked, her voice shaking. Nothing. Just focus on your family. The trust handles everything else. I stood quietly in the hallway, watching this woman receive the help that might have saved Harold if it had existed 6 months ago. The trust had already funded 12 emergency cardiac procedures, and the hospital was expanding their cardiac care unit. This was Harold's legacy now. Not property or money passed down to ungrateful children, but lives saved and families kept whole during their darkest moments. My phone buzzed. Another text from Everett. He'd been calling and texting regularly for the past month, ever since his divorce from Oilia had been finalized. I'd heard through mutual friends that she'd left him the moment she realized there would be no inheritance. Mom, can we please talk? I know I made mistakes, but I'm your son. Please. I deleted the message without responding, just like I deleted the previous dozen. Some wounds cut too deep for apologies to heal. The young woman from the cardiac unit walked past me with her children, heading toward the elevator. Her husband would live, would recover, would come home to his family because Harold's final act of love had made that possible. I felt a warmth in my chest that I hadn't experienced since the morning I found Harold on our bathroom floor. I drove home to the house I'd decided to keep. Despite everyone's advice to downsize, the place felt different now. Not empty because Harold was gone, but peaceful because of people who'd seen it as a prize to be one were gone. 2. I'd had the locks changed and the security system updated. Everett and Oilia no longer had keys, no longer had access to walk through my life, making plans for my future. In the kitchen, I made coffee and sat at the table where Harold used to read his paper. I pulled out the photo album I'd been working on, pictures of our 42 years together. The front doorbell rang, interrupting my memories. Through the window, I could see a familiar silver sedan. Mr. Crawford stood on my porch, but today he wasn't carrying his official briefcase. Instead, he held a small wrapped package. "Mrs. Holloway, I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I have something for you." "Harold left this with me," he said, handing me the package, "with instructions to give it to you 6 months after the trust was established and functioning." My hands trembled as I unwrapped a small wooden box, carved with intricate detail. I recognized Harold's handiwork. Inside was a letter in his familiar handwriting and a small silver key. "My dearest Doreen," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then 6 months have passed since you learned the truth about our family. I hope by now the shock has faded and you're beginning to understand why I made the choices I did." The key opens a safety deposit box at First National. Inside, you'll find the deed to a small cabin in Montana that I purchased last year. I never told you about it because I wanted it to be a surprise for our 50th anniversary. It's near a lake surrounded by mountains, with everything you need for a simple, peaceful life. My breath caught. Harold had bought us a secret cabin, a place where we could disappear from the world and just be together. I know you're probably wondering why I didn't tell you about the trust before I died. The truth is, I hoped I was wrong about Everett and Oilia. I hoped that when faced with real crisis, they would choose family over money. I gave them every opportunity to prove me wrong. But I also knew that if they didn't change, you would need protection from their greed. You have always been too generous, too willing to sacrifice for others. I couldn't bear the thought of you spending your remaining years being manipulated by people who saw you as an obstacle to their inheritance. The letter described the cabin in detail. The wraparound porch where I could watch sunrises, the stone fireplace where I could read, the garden plot where I could grow vegetables and flowers. You don't have to go there if you don't want to, but if you ever need to escape, if the memories here become too painful or the loneliness too overwhelming, you have a place where you can start fresh. The final paragraph made me cry harder than I'd cried since Harold's funeral. "I love you more than words can express, Doreen. You gave me 42 years of happiness, and I hope I gave you the same. Live the rest of your life for yourself, not for ungrateful children or manipulative relatives or well-meaning friends who think they know what's best for you. Be free, my darling. Be gloriously, completely free." After Mr. Crawford left, I sat with Harold's letter and the key to our secret cabin, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Excitement about the future. I had a choice to make. I could stay here, surrounded by the past, or I could take Harold's final gift and build something new. That evening, I called the airline and booked a flight to Montana. Not to move permanently, but to see what Harold had chosen for us, to understand his vision of our life together. 3 days later, I stood on the porch of a charming log cabin overlooking a pristine mountain lake. Harold had chosen perfectly. On the mantel, I found one final surprise, a framed photo of Harold and me from our honeymoon, along with a note in his handwriting that simply said, "Welcome home, my love." I spent a week at the cabin, walking the lakeside trails, watching eagles fish, feeling a peace I'd forgotten was possible. When I returned to town, I found 17 missed calls from Everett and a desperate voicemail from Oilia. "Doreen, I know you hate me, but please listen. I made terrible mistakes. Everett is falling apart. He needs his mother. Please." I deleted the message without calling back. Harold's letter had been clear. Live for myself, not for ungrateful children who only remembered they had a mother when they needed something from her. Instead, I called Dr. Martinez at the hospital. I'd like to expand the trust, I told him. I want to add a grief counseling program for families who lose loved ones to cardiac emergencies. A year later, I split my time between the house Harold and I had shared and the cabin he'd given me for my future. I volunteer at a hospital, helping other widows navigate the practical and emotional challenges of sudden loss. I'd learned to kayak on the mountain lake and had planted a garden. Everett still called occasionally, but I listened to his voicemails and never called back. Some lessons could only be learned through consequences, and some relationships couldn't survive the truth about what they'd really been built on. On Harold's birthday, I drove to the cemetery with flowers from both gardens. "You were right about everything," I whispered to his headstone. About Everett, about Oilia, about what I needed to be happy. "I miss you every day, but I'm not lonely anymore. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm free." As I walked back to my car, I saw a familiar figure standing by the cemetery gate. Everett, thinner than I had ever seen him, waiting for me. "Mom," he said quietly as I approached. "Please, just 5 minutes." I looked at my son, this man I had raised and loved and lost his own greed, and felt something I hadn't expected. "Pity, I know what you're going to say." I told him that you're sorry, that you've learned from your mistakes, that you want another chance to be the son I raised. He nodded eagerly. "Yes, all of that. I've been going to therapy, working on myself, trying to understand how I became someone who could treat you and Dad that way." "Good," I said simply. "I hope therapy helps you find peace." "Does that mean, can we try again? Can I come visit? Maybe call you sometimes." "Everett," I said gently, "I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen, or that trust can be rebuilt from nothing." His face crumpled. "But I'm your son. You were my son. And maybe someday, if you do the hard work of becoming someone worthy of that relationship, we might find a way back to each other. But that's your journey to make, not mine to wait for." I walked past him toward my car, feeling lighter with each step. "Mom, please," he called after me. "I don't have anyone else." I turned back one final time. "Neither did I," I said. "When your father was dying and I needed my family most, I had no one, but I learned to build a life worth living anyway. So can you." I drove away without looking back, heading home to pack for another week at the cabin. The mountains were calling, the lake was waiting, and I had a life to live, not for anyone else, but finally, gloriously for myself. Harold had given me the greatest gift possible, the freedom to choose happiness over obligation, peace over guilt, and my own dreams over everyone else's expectations. I was 66 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was completely, beautifully free. I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar?